I think, the reason I really love Christmas Eve is because Christmas Eve was the way that I entered into the life of faith. I've said this before probably, but, I didn't grow up going to church. My family weren't churchgoers, and my parents had reasons for that, but we didn't go, and my grandparents didn't go either, and so I really didn't have any exposure to religion or church, and, I knew sort of the basic outline of the story. I knew what Christmas is about. I knew what Easter was about. But it just wasn't an important part of our lives, the religious aspect of that. My one real experience in church, I had a girlfriend in high school, and she invited me to her church, and I was really nervous about going because I didn't really have any experience, and so I thought I should memorize the Lord's Prayer, because I bet they say that in church, because I'd heard of that. And so, in those days, we didn't have, Google to look it up. I had to go, find it somewhere. I don't even remember where I found it, but I did, and I learned the Lord's Prayer, and I was really proud of myself, and I go to her church, and her church is one of those churches where they say debtors, right? So I learned the wrong version of the Lord's Prayer, so it wasn't really a positive experience, and I knew people who went to church, and we used to have people. I grew up in the Midwest, and we would have people come knocking on your door on a regular basis to ask you if you had accepted Jesus as your Lord and Savior. And if you just said no, but I sure would like to, they would say their prayer and be gone. Otherwise, you'd have to talk to them for a long time. So I didn't really have positive experiences of Christianity growing up. And then one year, I was in my early 20s. A neighbor, I lived in Saratoga Springs then, a neighbor invited me to a Christmas Eve service at the Episcopal Church. And, I didn't know Episcopal from anything. It was a big old stone church. It's right in downtown Saratoga. And I go to this Christmas Eve service, and it's in this, this giant old building, and it's, they've got they have this wrought iron fence wall thing between you and where I'm at right now, and it's all decorated. It's called a rood screen, yeah. And it was a huge church, and so the priest sat kind of somewhere over there in a corner. You couldn't actually see them. Their voice would just kind of come out from somewhere over there, and they did the incense. And this was a giant church. They literally had an entire orchestra in the balcony to play the music. Nothing against you, Rob, but it was a whole orchestra. And it was at 11 o'clock at night too, right? And it was the craziest thing I had ever experienced in my whole life. There was nothing else like it I'd ever encountered. I thought, man, that was really something. I think I'll come back next year. And that's what I did. So next year I went back at Christmas Eve, and I did that for about 10 years. Christmas Eve, I'd go to church every Sunday. And then I moved to Oregon. I had to find a new church to go to on Christmas Eve. That was nerve-wracking. And it was there in Oregon that I encountered people who were Christians, but not in the way that I'd ever really encountered them before. They were genuine. They really tried to do good. They didn't talk about it so much. They just kind of did it. You know what I mean? And it really moved me. I had gone through a lot in my life in my early 30s by this time. Things hadn't all turned out really well. I was a bit adrift, and I needed some kind of foundation. And I saw what these people had, and they had something that I really wanted. I wanted to be like these people. They were just my co-workers. And they didn't go to an Episcopal church. They went to a different church. But I thought to myself, I went on Christmas Eve, and I'd been talking with these people, and I said to myself, this year, I think I'm going to go on Easter too. I hear they have a big celebration on that day. And so I did, and eventually I got to a point where I had kind of this experience where I thought, this is really something speaking to me here. And I emailed the priest at the church where I went to on Christmas Eve and Easter, the real Fr Jon, and I said, well, I'd really like to kind of be baptized and, join the church. And to be honest, as Fr Jon has told me subsequently, he was pretty dubious because people don't do that. They don't just write up and go, I'd like to be really super involved in church, because that's just really not how it works. It wasn't how it worked 25 years ago. It's not how it works today. And so he was pretty dubious. But anyway, I went and I got involved, and before long, like, people are going, have you ever thought of being a priest? And I'm like, absolutely not. And in fact, that girlfriend that I had in high school, whose church she invited me to, we stayed in touch over the years, and she couldn't believe that I was getting ordained either. In fact, she had to drive out to West Virginia to see for herself when I actually was in a parish that I really was a minister. She couldn't believe it either. But so that's the journey I went on, and I've been thinking about it over the years and about what it was that drew me in at Christmas Eve especially. Because it's good all year long, but at Christmas Eve especially. And what we celebrate on Christmas Eve, we celebrate the birth of Jesus, of course. But what we really are celebrating is the birth of hope. And hope is really, really powerful. Because hope is the engine that drives transformation and change. If we can't imagine that tomorrow can be better than today, then why would we bother to expend any energy to make anything different? We could just keep living like we've always lived. But hope is this little fire that can burn in us that tells us that tomorrow can be better. That it doesn't have to be like this. We don't have to accept things as they are. We can expect change. We can make change happen ourselves. And so this day we celebrate this really powerful thing called hope. And we see it in the story of God and God's people over and over in the scriptures, that people find themselves in difficult and challenging places and they don't know where to turn. And from some unexpected place, God enters in and everything changes. And Jesus, of course, is the penultimate story like this, where things are bad for ancient Israel in this time. It's bad for the world. I mean, we love to talk about the Roman Empire, but the truth is it was a pretty terrible place to live unless you happened to be the Roman emperor. And for the people, the average people in Palestine, it was a terrible way of life. And it had been that way for a long, long time. And when Jesus came, he didn't come as the son of the high priest, and he didn't come as the son of the emperor or in some noble house. He's nobody special. He's born in a barn. His parents can't even find a place to stay while they're traveling. And his parents aren't even married yet. I mean, there's a lot of things that stacked against Jesus. He's a nobody from nowhere. And yet, it's through him that God enters into the world from an unexpected place. And God continues to enter into our lives. And one of the things that the scriptures show us is the way that God enters our lives. And when we get to know those stories, we begin to see for ourselves how God enters into our lives. And I know that's what happened to me all those years ago on that first Christmas Eve, that something entered into my life. And it was just a little seed. And it didn't sprout right away. It wasn't in fertile ground just yet, but it was there. And at the right time and in the right season, it began to grow and to sprout. And I think about that great gift and about the power of hope in my own life, because I was at a point where I was kind of out of that. And yet, when I encountered it, it had a powerful impact on me. And I hope that when you encounter God in your life, that it can have a powerful impact on you. And that you can hear that quiet voice of God entering your lives from unexpected places or unexpected people. That draws us forward into a life that is centered on this idea that we are called, most importantly, to treat each other lovingly. To look at the other people who are different from us, maybe people we don't even really like all that much. Like that one uncle, the guy, right? And to want the best for them. To want them to thrive and to prosper and to do well and to not know sorrow and pain and suffering. if we can encounter the people we meet in our life in that way. Like the other day, I went to Walgreens, and I was in a hurry, and I was kind of running late for something, and I just needed something really quick, and I run in, and it's like that one person in the line who doesn't know how the machine works, and the card's in backwards, and she's kind of really slow, and I'm frustrated, right? And it's oh. And then I go out, and of course she's parked next to me. And, she has 2 bags, and she can't quite get them in her car. And I'm oh man, I'm in a hurry. And then it occurs to me, John, why are you being such a jerk here, man? Help this lady. Right? And if we can just encounter people and do something as small as help a lady put a bag of groceries or whatever the heck she was buying at Walgreens in her car. Right? And to not let our own impatience get in the way of our ability to love. We would live in a world transformed if we could encounter everybody with that spirit. And that is what we celebrate here today. That hope that can change us and that draws us into being people whose motivation is love. Amen. What can